The Gilded Age was a time of rapid technological change. First and foremost, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific lines met in Utah to form America's first transcontinental railroad. The railroad opened the door for the transport of many goods and services throughout the country, such as oil. Oil was able to provide a new, more efficient way of keeping homes lit at night, although many of its benefits were not reaped until after the Industrial Revolution. Furthermore, natural resources became of importance, such as coal and iron. These two worked hand in hand as iron provided structures while coal helped to fuel them. For example, coal powered iron locomotives. Iron was given new life when Henry Bessemer in the 1850s perfected an inexpensive way to produce steel in industry. Through oxidation, Bessemer found out that iron could have its impurities removed and easily be converted into steel.
Low-grade molten pig iron is poured in through the mouth, then swung back to vertical, and a blast of air is blown through the base of the converter, through the liquid metal. The low-grade iron is high in carbon, and the hot air burns off the excess carbon. A spectacular 10-metre flame and fountain of heat shoot out of the mouth. When the iron is purified, the bowl is tilted down again and the newly made steel teamed or poured out into ladles and cast into ingot.
Samuel Morse also invented a key concept in the Gilded Age, the telegraph, which enabled people to communicate from far away. Morse was also the co-inventor of Morse code. The telephone was also invented in the Gilded Age by Mr. Alexander Graham Bell. Bell Telephone Corporation is still in business up to today. Arguably the most important invention up to today, Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. After thousands of tries getting it wrong, Edison finally found a way to produce light from electricity.
Colonial immigration was during the 1600s and late 1700s. Many immigrants came from England and Ireland. They came for both social and economic reasons. One of the difficulties that they faced while they were in America was disease, of which their immune system has not yet seen, and the Indians, which were always attacking the immigrants because they were on the Indians' land. Old immigration took place in the beginning of the 19th century, in which Western and Northern Europeans came to America. They faced many problems like nativism, in which groups like the Know Nothing Party did not allow immigrants to get jobs because they were not American. New immigration took place after the 1850s, in which Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans came to America for economic opportunities. A group of those Europeans were the Irish, in which they came because of the Irish potato famine. A large group of the immigrants were affected by labor unions because the unions would not allow immigrants into their line of work. Many immigrants came to America searching for economic opportunities, but some groups like the Chinese were not allowed into America because of the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This prevented them from becoming a citizen or becoming immigrants into the United States. Also, there were acts set in place like the Act of 1824 and 1829 that limited the number of immigrants allowed into the United States. There are many social theories going on in America about immigration. One was assimilation, in which immigrants came to America but they retained all their aspects or traditions of their cultural heritage. There's also the salad bowl theory, in which all the cultures came together and contributed to a new culture in America, but you can pick out each different culture. There's also the melting pot theory, in which many cultures got together and contributed to a new and unique American culture.
Lady Liberty, with her book of recipes, and the finest one she's got is the great American melting pot, 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 the great American melting pot.
With the rise of new machinery, there were two major options for the working class in America. Many were robbed of their jobs, but several jobs were created for others. There was a higher need for mechanics and machine operators than ever before, leaving craftsmen with limited employment opportunities. Most of these positions were required in factories of America's fastest growing cities, such as New York and Chicago. City populations began to rise exponentially due to the need for these workers. For example, New York's population had doubled. Meanwhile, Chicago's population had quintupled. With the major population booms occurring in bigger cities, housing developers were put under huge strain. Many needed to live in cities to work, but development could only occur so fast. People were then forced to live on the streets or tenements. Additionally, the heavy demand for housing also caused prices to rise, further stressing the impoverished workers. Cramming into small areas almost guarantees the occurrence of disease. High property prices and low salary caused many people in urban centers to go without hygienic materials or medicine. With limited sanitation, germs were spread rampant and disease was practically unavoidable. Due to the rise in industry, manufacturing caused for many dangerous tasks in the workplace. During this time, there was no labor laws or unions to protect the rights of the workers. Children were often forced to work difficult jobs and could lead to severe injury. There was no compensation for such injuries, and families could be left with no financial support. Political machines, such as New York City's Tammany Hall, were organizations led by party bosses to lead all aspects of city government. They would order for service tasks for the cities and negatively impacted the dwellers with increasingly high taxes. Although with urbanization came positive effects as well. Many new technological innovations came about, which advanced America globally. For example, the creation of elevators, skyscrapers, street lighting, and sewage systems all had occurred. Also during this time, there was a rise in philosophy. First, the Puritan work ethic arose. It preached and emphasized hard work, frugality, and prosperity as a declaration of a person's devotion to the Christian faith. Additionally, the concept of social Darwinism began to be accepted. Adapted from the findings of Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, the theory proposed that only the fittest survived and flourished. The reason certain people were at the top of their businesses was because they were the best adapted at running that industry.
The Wealth of Nations was written by Adam Smith in 1776 and stated that businesses should be regulated by the invisible hand, or impersonal economic forces of the law of supply and demand, not by the government. This was the origin of the concept of laissez-faire. A monopoly is when a specific person or enterprise is the only supplier of a particular commodity. Monopolies are characterized by a lack of economic competition to produce a good or service. An example of monopoly during the Gilded Age was John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company.
Monopolizar. Monopolizar.
Here in Brunei, I am the one and only seller. I set my price, I sell my stuff, I am the pricing maker. The whole market demand all goes to me, only super.
A conglomerate is a combination of two or more corporations engaged in entirely different businesses that fall under one corporate group, usually involving a parent company and many subsidiaries. An example of a conglomerate during the Gilded Age was J.P. Morgan's General Electric. A business pool is a temporary affiliation of two or more people formed for the purpose of attempting to manipulate a security's price or volume. An example of this would be a railroad pool where several railroad companies would set their prices high while deliberately not trying to compete with each other on price. A trust is when a group of trustees come together to consolidate one corporation that can eventually lead to the configuration of a monopoly. An example of a trust during the Gilded Age would be Andrew Carnegie's Steel Trust. A holding company is a company or firm that owns other companies' outstanding stock. An example of a holding company during the Gilded Age would be J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller's Northern Securities Company. Andrew Carnegie was the leader of the fast-growing steel industry. He worked his way up from being a poor Scottish immigrant to becoming the superintendent of a Pennsylvania railroad. In the 1870s, he started manufacturing steel in Pittsburgh. John D. Rockefeller founded a company that would monopolize most of America's oil refineries that was called Standard Oil. By 1881, he controlled 90% of the oil business. After deciding to retire, Andrew Carnegie sold his company for over $400 million to a new steel company headed by J.P. Morgan. This was the first billion-dollar company with the largest world enterprise. Jay Gould was the leading American railroad developer and speculator. Henry Ford was an American inventor and entrepreneur who revolutionized manufacturing through the assembly line. Conspicuous consumption is the spending of money and the acquiring of luxury goods and services to publicly display economic power. During the Gilded Age, families with new wealth broadcasted their status through conspicuous consumption. Philanthropy is goodwill to fellow members of the human race for humanitarian purposes. Many believed that the wealthy in society during the Gilded Age should follow the gospel of wealth. This novel was written by Andrew Carnegie and stated that it was the responsibility of the wealthy to donate to the poor.
With the new age comes a new reaction from the common people. With its many changes to the way Americans live, the Gilded Age was not an exception by any means. During this period of time, the government had very little regulations on big businesses, which put many small business owners out of work, causing massive unemployment. In the case of Munn v. Illinois, 1877, the United States Supreme Court upheld the Granger Laws, establishing as constitutional the principle of regulation of private businesses involved in serving the public interest. This ruling, however, was narrowed by the Supreme Court in the APUSH case, which denied states the power to regulate interstate rates for railroads. That led to the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission. The Interstate Commerce Commission, or ICC, was created as a result of the interstate commerce. The ICC was a federal regulatory agency that was in charge of making sure railroads kept up with new regulations. This act was the first federal law that regulated private industry in the United States. With the huge workforce of big businesses, people started to realize that they weren't being treated with the amount of respect that they deserved to be. This led to the formation of labor unions. Labor unions were a group of workers that would come together to use collective bargaining to demand better working conditions and pay from their employer. The Knights of Labor was a labor union that wasn't so successful because they tried to unionize skilled and unskilled workers who could easily be replaced. A labor union that was successful, however, was the American Federation of Labor, or AFL. The AFL was led by Samuel Gompers and only included skilled, working men. Samuel Gompers was a voice for the union, fighting for better wages and working conditions for the workers. An early movement by small farmers, mainly in the Midwest, fought monopolistic grain transport practices. This movement was called the Granger Movement, and it was formed by Oliver H. Kelly in 1867. This is a group of farmers who came together to learn different, more efficient ways to farm. This group of roughly 800,000 farmers came together and captured several state legislatures in the Midwest through a system called block voting. The organization voted as a group on state legislatures to further help their cause. They created laws that came to be known as the Granger State Laws, which set maximum railroad rates and established state railroad commissions for administering this new legislation. Due to big businesses gaining monopolies, the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed by Congress in 1890. This law prohibited business activities that reduced competition in marketplaces. It was the first federal law to limit monopolies. Early reformists like Thomas Nast and Jane Addams sought to better the lives of poor Americans. Thomas Nast voiced his opinion in a different way, through political cartoons. His cartoons were a way for him to fight the government in a way that could have many hidden meanings. Jane Addams was a woman who ran a house called the Hull House. This was a house for poor families and immigrants in Chicago. She provided babysitting for working parents, food, and taught English to immigrants. This was a result of the many small businesses that were shut down by the large corporations.
Mark Twain coined the term Gilded Age, and he still says it the best. What is the chief end of man? To get rich. In what way? Dishonesty if we can. Honesty if we must. The Gilded Age changed America in several different ways. Through technology, big businesses, urbanization, and immigration. America was changed forever.